Did you know Henry VIII first planned to stay a faithful Catholic king, or that Elizabeth I was never expected to rule England at all? The Tudor tale is more than just history. It is a shocking chain of accidents, betrayals and sudden twists. It almost fell apart with each new generation, from Henry VII's unlikely win at Bosworth Field to Elizabeth's choice to stay the Virgin Queen. This documentary tracks each key moment across 118 years of Tudor rule. You will see how a line born in blood changed England, from a medieval kingdom to a modern nation-state. In 1455, England stood near chaos. For 30 years, the country fell into what we now name the Wars of the Roses, a terrible series of fights, betrayals and political moves between two branches of the royal Plantagenet family. The White Rose of York and the Red Rose of Lancaster became signs of a fight that split England and killed much of its noble class. This was not just a fight between two families. The Wars of the Roses came from deeper troubles. A weak King Henry VI, who had times of mental sickness, strong nobles with their own armies, and problems about who should rule next that were never truly settled. As battles burned across England, the list of dead grew. It included many of the country's most powerful families. Some think almost 80% of England's nobles died or were ruined in this time. The fight seemed to have no end. Edward IV of York took the throne in 1461, lost it in 1470, then took it back in 1471, when he died without warning in 1483. His brother Richard stole the crown from Edward's young sons, the famous princes in the Tower who vanished mysteriously. This takeover made a chance for Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian with a weak and complex claim to the throne. Henry Tudor's story is not the usual hero tale. Born in Wales in 1457 to Margaret Beaufort, who was only 13 years old at his birth, and Edmund Tudor, who died before Henry was born, his royal blood came through a line born outside marriage, later made legal by a king's order. After York ISE wins in the 1460s, young Henry ran to Brittany. He lived there in exile for 14 years. There he waited and watched England's politics, gathering backers and planning his return. The key moment came on August 22nd, 1485 at Bosworth Field. Henry Tudor, with an army of about 5,000 men, many of them French hired soldiers, faced King Richard III's bigger force of some 8,000 to 10,000 men. The fight changed when the strong Stanley family, who had stayed neutral until the last moment, joined Henry. Richard III, seeing his place fall apart, made a wild charge right at Henry. The king fought with courage, but was killed trying, the last English king to die in battle. With Richard dead, Henry was crowned right on the battlefield, with the dead king's small crown. He moved fast to make his place safe, saying his rule began the day before the fight. This made all who fought against him guilty of turning against the king. He married Elizabeth of York, daughter of Edward IV, joining the two fighting houses and starting the Tudor line. The marriage was both a smart political move and a true success, unusual for royal weddings of that time. Henry VII brought new ideas to English kingship that should get more notice. He was crowned before Parliament met, making clear his power came from winning, not from their yes. Not many know Henry carried a red dragon flag at Bosworth, linking himself to Welsh prophecies about a native ruler coming back to Britain. By tying himself to Arthurian legend, Henry got support from the Welsh, while showing himself as a half-mythical figure to the English. The Wars of the Roses had a surprising archaeology follow-up in 2012, when researchers found Richard III's body under a car park in Leicester. His bones showed signs of a curved spine and many battle hurts, proving old reports of both his looks and violent death. The find gave physical proof of the moment Plantagenet rule ended, and the Tudor Age started, a sign that the big events that shape countries can sometimes lie right under our feet. When Henry VII took the throne in 1485, England was tired from 30 years of civil war. Not like earlier kings who grabbed power, Henry did not celebrate with big tournaments or army campaigns. Instead, he began the slow work of fixing a broken kingdom. Through careful rule, smart diplomacy, and money control, Henry knew winning the crown was only step one. Keeping it needed making his rule seem right to his people in foreign lands. His wedding to Elizabeth of York joined the fighting houses. But Henry did more by making new royal symbols. The Tudor rose, mixing Lancaster's red rose with York's white rose, showed up on buildings, papers, and royal clothes. A constant picture reminder the civil war's word on in the new time had begun. The new king faced a quick problem. Many nobles still led private armies and hid Yorkshire support. Instead of killing possible foes, Henry made a system of bonds and promises, basically money guarantees of good action. Nobles signed deals promising big sums if they rebelled or broke the king's peace. This clever system meant possible troublemakers either stayed loyal or faced money ruin. One noble, Lord Berg, found himself under a promise of £70,000, millions in today's money, for keeping illegal soldiers. Henry also made the Court of Star Chamber, a special court that worked right under royal power, named for stars painted on its ceiling. This court kept normal legal steps to handle cases regular courts could not, especially when strong nobles were part, while later Tudor kings would use the Star Chamber to crush others. Under Henry VII, it mostly gave fair rulings where local courts would be scared. Instead of chasing costly foreign wars, Henry made England's place strong through marriage ties. In 1501, his oldest son, Arthur, married Catherine of Aragon, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. The Spanish deal gave England good trade benefits and safety against France. Henry planned for his daughter, Margaret, to marry King James IV of Scotland, hoping to make peace on England's north border. Henry's close watch on money matters became famous. His own account books still exist showing he tracked royal spending down to pennies. Records show payments of 4 shillings to a woman who brought the king strawberries, £2 to his fool, the court jester, and even 4 shillings for food for the royal monkeys. This care helped change the nearly empty money store he got into one holding about £1.5 million at his death, a huge sum for that time. Even with his careful rule, Henry faced several big threats. Lambert Simnelaboy, taught to act like the Earl of Warwick, possible Yorkshire claimant, got real support in 1487. After beating Simnel's forces, Henry just made the boy a kitchen servant, a smart propaganda move that showed how silly the fake claimant's claims were. A worse threat came from Perkin Warbeck, who said he was Richard, Duke of York, one of the princes thought killed in the Tower. Warbeck got support from foreign powers, including Scotland and the Holy Roman Empire, before Henry Cotton finally executed him in 1499. When Henry VII died in 1509, he left a changed England. The money store was full, government systems worked well. The nobles were controlled and the Tudor line was safe through several foreign marriages. While not as famous as his son Henry VIII or granddaughter Elizabeth I, Henry VII's wins were amazing. He built the base that let the Tudor line grow. A strange note to Henry's rule came in 1869, when his grave was opened during work at Westminster Abbey. Workers found his body kept in a rare state, looking almost alive. Sadly, this special historical item was lost in 1941, when a German bomb hit the building where it was kept. On April 21, 1509, Henry VII died, and his only living son got the throne. The new King Henry VIII was just 17 years old, tall, strong, and very different from his careful father. London cheered as the young king rode through the streets. After years of his father's money limits, Henry VIII at once showed a new time by spending a lot. He ordered political prisoners freed, gave money to the poor, and planned tournaments to show his physical skill. The difference between father and son could not be more clear. Where Henry VII had been quiet and planning, young Henry VIII was lively and quick to act. The old king worked to fill the money store, the new king seemed eager to empty it. Henry VII wore plain clothes, and stayed away from big shows. His son ordered fancy clothes covered in jewels and set up fun events on a scale England had never seen. Weeks after his crowning, Henry did his father's diplomacy plans by marrying Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess, who had been briefly married to his older brother Arthur before his death. The marriage made England's tie with Spain stronger and gave Henry, Queen 6 years older, skilled in royal work. The match seemed to mate both political need and personal liking. The young king seemed truly to like Catherine. Henry's schooling had readied him for more than just being king. He learned languages, maths, the study of God and music. He could speak Latin and French well, wrote music and joined talks on God. These were not just school work. Henry wrote many music pieces that still exist today, including Pastime with Good Company, which grew popular at his court. He owned almost 20 music tools and could play many well. Body action took much of the young king's time. He stood over 6 feet, all very tall for the 1500s, with wide shoulders and strong legs. A skilled wrestler, bowman and horseman, Henry specially shone at jousting. These were not just games for Henry, but chances to be the knightly ideal he admired. At tournaments, he used names like Sir Loyal Heart, linking himself to the made-up knights of Arthurian legend. The king's looks matched his bigger-than-life weight. The Venice ambassador called him the finest-looking prince in Christian lands, noting his reddish hair, light skin and round face, so lovely it would suit a pretty woman. Not like many rulers who rule through helpers, young Henry joined in government from the start, sitting in council meetings and reading diplomacy letters. Henry's early court drew some of Europe's best thinkers. He made the humanist scholar Thomas More a royal advisor, and wrote to Dutch thinker Erasmus, who praised the king's learning and mind. These ties were more than for show. Henry joined in brain debates and showed true interest in Renaissance ideas, an out-school rule and faith. The first years of Henry's rule made an image that fights our modern view of the king. Not the cruel, heavy figure of his later years, young Henry was much admired across Europe for an ambassador's tool of his smart body skills and charm. His court was full of music, art, philosophy, talks and sport contests. Even faith changers saw hope in him, thinking his brain curiosity might make him open to new ideas. Few could guess how much this Renaissance prince would change, or how far the changes his personal wants would soon start across England. Henry VIII wanted more than a crown, he wanted fame. By 1511 Europe was caught in the War of the Holy League, with Pope Julius II making an alliance against France. The young English king grabbed this chance to bring back old English claims to the French throne, dreams that sounded like Henry V's wins a century before. In June 1513, Henry led an army of 30,000 men across the English Channel, helping to write his name in history books next to his medieval heroes. The Battle of the Spurs, fought near the Rouen and in North France, hardly met Henry's big hopes. When English forces met French horse soldiers on August 16, the French troops pulled back so fast English propaganda said they used their spurs more than their weapons. This small fight was changed by Tudor propaganda into a major win. Henry took the towns of the Rouen and Tournai, but these gains cost a lot and would later be traded in future talks. While Henry chased limited fame in France, his wife Catherine of Aragon handled a far worse threat, using England's part in Europe. King James IV of Scotland invaded North England with about 30,000 men. Catherine set up England's defence, appearing before troops in armour and giving stirring talks, though she was with child. On September 9th, 1513, English forces, under the Earl of Surrey, met the Scottish army at Flodden Field. The fight ended in disaster for Scotland, with James IV killed with much of Scotland's noble class. Nearly 10,000 Scots died next to about 1,500 English losses. This clear win got while Henry was away showed Catherine's political skill and made England's north border safe for years. Behind much of Henry's burly for policy stood Thomas Wolsey, a butcher's son whose great brain and droll skills pushed him to huge power. By 1515 Wolsey had the jobs of Lord Chancellor Card and a Lend Papal Legate, really controlling both church and state in England. Wolsey made a foreign policy that placed England as a deal maker between bigger European rivals, especially Spain and France. This method gave England more sway than its army or money strength might allow. The most amazing show of Henry's diplomacy hopes came in June 1520 at the Field of the Cloth of Gold, a top meeting with French King Francis I. For 3 weeks the two kings tried to beat each other, with shows of wealth and body skill in fields between Uines and Adres near Calais. Henry ordered a short-term palace with glass windows and real pipes. The English brought 6,000 men and almost 3,000 horses. Wine ran from fountains, and both kings joined wrestling matches and jousting tournaments. Even with its beauty, the meeting made no lasting diplomacy results. Within 2 years, England and France were again at war. The European political scene grew more complex as Henry's rule went on. The Habsburg ruler Charles V controlled Spain, the Netherlands part of Italy, and was made Holy Roman Emperor in 1519, making a power that circled France. Henry briefly thought of chasing the emperor title himself, but his kingdom lacked the money and sway to fight Charles. Instead, England found itself asked by both Charles V, who was Catherine of Aragon's nephew, and Francis I of France, each wanting an alliance against the other. By the 1520s, Henry's dreams of army fame had faded. His campaigns had emptied the money stored his father so carefully filled. The European political situation had grown more tricky, with powers too big for England to fight straight. Still in his body, prime Henry kept competing in tournaments and showing himself as the knightly king his school and youth had readied him to be. By 1525, Henry VIII faced a serious problem. After 16 years married to Catherine of Aragon, he had only one living child, a daughter Mary. For a king fixed on his line's future, this was not acceptable. The Tudor claim to the throne stayed fairly new, and memories of the Wars of the Roses remained. Without a male child, Henry feared England might again fall into civil war after his death. Catherine had several pregnancies, including miscarriages, stillbirths, and babies dying soon after birth. By 1525, she was 40 years old and unlikely to have more children. Henry, growing more hopeless, began to question if his marriage was right. He fixed on a part from Leviticus saying, "If a man marries his brother's wife, they will stay childless." Since Catherine had first been married to Henry's older brother Arthur, who died in 1502, the king said this Bible curse explained his lack of sons. Henry missed a key fact. Pope Julius II had given a special allowance for his marriage to Catherine, specially handling the matter of her first marriage. The king now said this allowance was not good because no pope had the power to overrule God's law. His point held a handy logic. If the marriage had always been not good, Henry could seek a new wife without the shame of divorce, which the Catholic Church banned. The king's case was made complex by world politics. Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V, controlled much of Europe and really held Pope Clement VII as a political prisoner after taking Rome in 1527. The Pope, caught between Henry's asks and Charles's push, put off making a choice for years, hoping the English king might lose interest, or the political scene might change. Henry grew more upset as church processes dragged on with no answer. Meanwhile, he had fallen in love with a Berliner lady helping Queen Catherine, not like her sister Mary, who had earlier been Henry's lover, and refused to give herself to the king without marriage. This fight only raised Henry's will to end his first marriage and make him his queen. The change in Henry's big matter came through to key helpers Thomas Cromwell and Thomas Cranmer. Cromwell, a brilliant ruler and liar, made a new approach. Instead of keep fighting through courts, he said Henry should call himself the top power over the church in England. Cranmer, made Archbishop of Canterbury in 1533, quickly said Henry's marriage to Catherine was not good. letting the king marry Anne, who was already with child with the future Elizabeth I. Between 1532 and 1534, Parliament passed a set of acts splitting the English Church from Rome. The Act of Supremacy in 1534 officially made Henry the top head of the Church of England. This radical step marked the start of the English Reformation. Though Henry himself stayed mostly Catholic in his faith belief, the odd part of Henry's break with Rome was striking. Just 13 years before, in 1521, Pope Leo X had given Henry the title Defender of the Faith for writing a book defending Catholic sacraments against Martin Luther's attacks. This title, still used by British kings today, was given to a king who would soon refuse the Pope's power completely. Henry's search for an annulment changed England's religious scene for good. What began as a personal matter of who follows became a national revolution. Yet the king's reasons stayed about his line, not faith ideas. While religious changes saw a chance to bring Protestant thoughts into England, Henry mainly wanted control over his marriage and his line's future. The religious changes he started, though, would grow far past his first plans, finally reshaping English identity and setting the stage for fights that would rule the next century. Anne Boleyn changed England more deeply than almost any royal wife in history. She entered Henry VIII's court around 1522 as a lady helping Queen Catherine, bringing with her French cool and Renaissance ideas, not like many women at court, and showed little wish to be just another of Henry's lovers. Her refusal to follow her sister Mary's path into the king's bed made both anger and strong interest for Henry, who chased her for nearly 7 years before they married, and was more than a love interest. She had political brain and faith, belief that shaped royal policy. She kept ties with land reformers and pushed like-minded people for church jobs, further setting reformers' sway at the heart of the Tudor court. Her part as queen gave her a place to help spread Protestant writing and ideas, backing Henry's break from Roman ways that reached far past personal reasons. In January 1533, Anne and Henry married in a secret ceremony. She was already with child, making the timing key. Thomas Cranmer, the newly made Archbishop of Canterbury, said Henry's marriage to Catherine was not good in May, and Anne was crowned queen in June. In September she gave birth to a daughter, the future Elizabeth I. The birth upset Henry, who had made himself think and would give the son he badly wanted. Anne's crowning marked the peak of dramatic religious changes. Parliament passed the Act of Supremacy in 1534, officially making Henry head of the Church of England. Thomas Cromwell began closing monasteries and sending their wealth to the crown. English Bibles showed up in churches and the Mass had changes. These changes, while started for Henry's personal reasons, carried big faith meanings that unbacked. Court politics quickly turned against the new queen. Anne's sharp brain and will to save views made enemies. Her failure to make a male child weakened her play. By 1536, Henry's notice had moved to Jane Seymour, one of Anne's helping ladies. Thomas Cromwell, once Anne's ally, saw that her group threatened his sway and worked to remove her. In April 1536, Cromwell arrested several men of the Queen's house, including her brother George, on charges of adultery with Anne. The claims grew to include incest and planning the king's death. The proof, as we later study shows, and was not even at some places where said affairs happened. Still, on May 15th, Anne faced trial before a court of equals who all found her guilty. For days later, in what was stage built on Tower Green, in a new move, Henry set for a French swordsman to do the killing, not using an English axeman. This strange mercy making sure a skilled single cut, rather than the possible many hits an axeman might need, stands as one of history's most odd shows of thought, and kept her calm to the end, making a short speech, seeing the king's goodness to her, but never admitting to any crimes. With one cut she became the first English queen killed by her husband. Her body got no formal burial. Workers put her remains in an arrow chest and buried her in the Tower Chapel. Anne's looks added to stories that followed her death. Reports of the time note a small mole on her neck, maybe an extra nail or tiny sixth finger. These small points changed in enemy accounts into proof of witchcraft and demonic sway. The speed of her rise and fall, less than 3 years as queen, made a story that still interests historians. What came after Anne's killing showed its political nature. Henry married Jane Seymour just 11 days later. Parliament passed the Second Succession Act, saying both Mary and Elizabeth were not legal. Anne's dramatic fall set a pattern of royal harshness that would mark the rest of Henry's rule, and for good changed the tie between king and court. In 1536, Thomas Cromwell began the widest taking of property in English history. Under Henry VIII's power, agents went across England, visiting monasteries, abbeys, priory, and convents that had stood for centuries. These religious houses controlled about 1/4 of England's land wealth and served as centers of school, help for poor and spiritual life. Within 5 years, over 800 of these places closed for good, their property taken by the crown. The official reason given to the public fixed on moral failures. Cromwell's agents made the compendium come to run, a paper listing claimed wrongs inside monasteries, monks breaking promises of no sex, money mismanagement, and religious superstitions. Many modern historians question how true these reports were, noting that agents judged hundreds of monasteries into short times, suggesting set ends rather than real looking. The closing went into parts. The first aimed at smaller houses with yearly money under £200, touching about 300 places. Henry and Cromwell thought smaller monasteries would meet less fight during closing. The second part, starting in 1538, chased the rich abbeys and priories that ruled local economies across England. Monks and nuns got small payments or moved to still standing houses. Abbots who fought faced killing for turning against the king, including those from Reading, Colchester and Glastonbury. The end of monasteries made quick social trouble. These places had given key social help, teaching children, caring for the sick, supporting the old and feeding the poor. When monasteries closed, these helps vanished, making hardship in many towns. Monastery libraries holding thousands of writings were destroyed or spread, causing a huge loss of knowledge and history records. Public feeling turned violent in October 1536, when North counties broke out in the Pilgrimage of Grace, the biggest people's uprising of Tudor England. About 30,000 people marched under the flag of the 5 Wounds of Christ, asking for monasteries brought back in old religious ways. Henry first talked with the rebels, promising pardons. Once they spread, he ordered harsh paybacks, killing hundreds who took part, including their leader, lawyer Robert Taskey, who was hanged in chains at York. The money gain for Henry VIII was huge. From monastery properties, the crown got land worth about £90,000 in yearly income, more wealth than all earlier English kings had owned together. Henry used this fortune to build coast forts, pay for wars in France and Scotland, and make rich palaces, yet much of this wealth quickly went through poor handling, rising prices and continued army spending. The closing changed English society by making a new class of landowners loyal to Tudor rule, while Henry kept best properties for the crown. Cromwell sold much old church land to merchants, lawyers and small gentry. These new landowners had direct money interest in stopping any Catholic return that might take back church properties. This giving out basically made a strong group set on religious change, or at least keeping the new normal. Even while taking apart monasteries, Henry kept clashing faith positions through the closing. He refused the Pope's power while forcing old Catholic ideas like transplantation. This mismatch made a mixed church, not fully changed nor fully Catholic. Monks who gave up peacefully often got jobs in the new church order as deans or prebendaries. Archaeology proof keeps showing details of this wild time. Digs have found hidden stores of holy items and treasures that monks tried to save from being taken. In 1939, workers at Cheapside in London found a jeweled cross and other valuables purposely hidden during the closing. Abbey ruins across England, like fountains, revolved tint instead as physical signs of this huge move of power from church to state. Monuments to a religious revolution that for good changed England's spiritual and physical land. The change of Henry VIII from lively Renaissance prince to fearful bully shows one of history's most dramatic personal falls. By the 1540s, the once strong king could hardly walk. A jousting accident in 1536 opened an old leg wound that never healed right, growing into a lasting sore. Court doctors tried various treatments, including burning with hot irons and regular draining, which gave short help but no cure. This constant pain likely added to Henry's more and more odd acts and wild temper. The king's looks changed greatly. His last suit of armour, still shown at the Tower of London, shows a 54-inch waist, 3 times the size of his strong youth. By 1546, Henry weighed nearly 400 pounds and needed a machine lift to move him between floors at his palaces. Servants built specially made stronger chairs and widened doors to fit his size. Even with his inability to move, Henry kept eating huge meals, often having several courses of game, meat, spices and sweet foods at one sitting. Henry's mind state fell with his body. The sure king, who once welcomed debate and advice, grew more and more suspicious of those near him. In 1540, he ordered the killing of Thomas Cromwell, the brilliant ruler who had planned the break with Rome and closing of monasteries. Cromwell's main crime was setting Henry's marriage to one of Cleves, a German princess whose picture the king found pretty, but whose real looks upset him. Henry left and after just 6 months, and killed Cromwell weeks later. The king's marriage history shows his changing mood. Jane Seymour, his third wife, died soon after giving birth to his son Edward in 1537. Anne of Cleves became his 4th wife in 1540 before their fast split. Catherine Howard, his 5th wife, faced killing in 1542 when her relationships before marriage came out. Catherine Parr, who married Henry in 1543, lived longer than him, partly through careful handling of his changing moods. She helped bring Henry and his daughters Mary and Elizabeth back together. Both earlier said not legal and pushed school at court. Henry's fear reached past his close circle. In 1538 to 1541, he killed Henry Pole, Lord Montague, with his family members, distant Plantagenet cousins who were possible other claimants to the throne. The old Countess of Salisbury, Margaret Pole, faced especially awful killing in 1541, when the new killer needed several hits to finish his work. These murders really ended remaining Plantagenet bloodlines that might challenge Tudor rule. As death neared, Henry tried to make his story safe through his will. In the Act of Succession, he set a ruling council to govern during his son Edward's young years, balancing old style and reform aside. The order put Edward first, then Mary, then Elizabeth, showing Henry's practical see that the Tudor line might need female rule, even with his lifelong search for a male child. Henry died on January 28, 1547 at Whitehall Palace. His last wishes for burial included a fancy tomb with 40 life-size bronze figures around a big monument. Money limits and later religious changes meant this big plan was never done. Instead, Henry's remains lie in a fairly St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, next to Jane Seymour, the only wife who gave him a son. The king's story proved complex and clashing. He had changed England's religious scene, while personally keeping many Catholic teachings. He claimed English freedom from foreign power, while making new central power at home. He chased line safety through several marriages that finally made 3 winning rulers, but none made the steady male line he so badly wanted. Henry VIII left England greatly different from the country he got, richer, more centered, religiously changed and diplomatically important. But these changes came at a huge human cost that showed the darker sides of total power. When Henry VIII died in January 1547, his 9-year-old son Edward became King Edward VI of England. The boy got not just a crown, but the religious revolution his father had started. Not like Henry, who kept many Catholic ways while refusing the Pope's power. Edward's rulers fully took Protestant belief and did wide changes that changed English religious life. Edward VIII, or the young king's mother's brother, quickly got the place of Lord Protector and made himself Duke of Somerset. As ruler of Somerset followed medium Protestant changes while trying to keep political peace. He passed laws closing chantries, places where priests said masses for the dead, sending their large wealth to the crown. Somerset also removed limits on printing and reading the Bible, allowing more reach to scripture, a basic Protestant idea. The most important religious growth under Somerset came in 1549, with the first Book of Common Prayer, written mainly by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. This book set normal worship through all England, changing the Latin Mass with English language services. The book showed a careful deal keeping enough old parts to avoid pushing away old-style believers, while adding Protestant belief. This balance proved hard to keep, as changes asked for more radical moves, and old-style believers fought new things. These religious changes started big people fight back in Devon and Cornwall. The prayer book rebellion broke when locals asked for old Latin services back. At the same time in Norfolk, Robert Kit led thousands of common people, protesting money problems, including taking of common lands by rich landowners. Somerset's fairly soft way with these uprisings added to his political fall. In October 1549, Dudley, Earl of Warwick, later Duke of Northumberland, planned Somerset's removal from power, and the Dudleys led religious changes sped up. The Second Book of Common Prayer, brought in 1550, took out many remaining Catholic parts. Stone altars were changed with wood communion tables. Fancy clothes went away in services, scripture and preaching more than ritual. These changes pushed England firmly toward Protestant ways, even with big people tied to old religion. Through these wild years, Edward VI was not just a still figurehead. The young king kept a detailed diary, writing government acts, diplomacy meetings, and even killings. His writing shows a smart early brain and strong Protestant belief. Foreign ambassadors often spoke of his religious knowledge, with one saying Edward debated faith points with bishops when he was only 10. His school under Renaissance humanists gave him skill in Latin, Greek, French, and deep knowing of Protestant thought. Edward's personal faith matched the changes done in his name. He once wrote a paper against the Pope's power, and often went to talks by leading Protestant speakers. Not like his father, who kept old views on transubstantiation, the belief that bread and wine become Christ's real body and blood during communion. Edward took the changed view that communion was a memory, not a magical change. By early 1553, Edward's health began falling fast. Signs point to tuberculosis, though some historians suggest other conditions. As his state worsened, Edward and his helpers faced a who follows crisis. His half-sister Mary stayed firmly Catholic and would likely turn the religious changes back if she became queen. Working with Northumberland, Edward wrote a device for the succession that passed by both Mary and Elizabeth for Lady Jane Grey, Northumberland's daughter-in-law and Edward's Protestant cousin. When Edward died on July 6, 1553, at just 15 years old, the tried who follows plan fell within days. Mary got the throne, and England faced another dramatic religious turn back. Even with his short rule, Edward's Protestant changes set bases that would later return under Elizabeth I, making the special religious identity that shaped England for hundreds of years to come. By early 1553, the truth of Edward VI's falling health made a government crisis. The 15-year-old king, hurt by what historians now think was tuberculosis, saw his life slipping away with growing care, not for himself, but for the Protestant Reformation he had led since taking the throne at age 9. Edward knew his Catholic half-sister Mary stood next in line to follow, and he feared all he had built would be taken apart. In his last months, Edward made a paper known as the Device for the Succession. This legal tool passed by both his sisters Mary and Elizabeth. For his Protestant cousin Lady Jane Grey, that 16 Jane had great royal signs. She was the granddaughter of Henry VII's sister Mary, and had Tudor blood in her veins. More important to Edward's Protestant council, she was a set reformer. Behind the Who Follows plans stood the wanting John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. As Lord President of Edward's Privy Council, Northumberland had put together huge power. He had also handily married his son Guildford to Lady Jane just weeks before, making sure his family would stay at the centre of power. The plan seemed perfect on paper. Edward would die, Jane would rise, and Protestant changes would go on under Northumberland's lead. When Edward died on July 6, 1553, things moved fast. Jane was called to Sion House and told she was now Queen of England. Her reaction shows much about her way. She fell in shock, crying and saying she was not enough for such duty. Still, she was named Queen on July 10th and moved to the Tower of London to wait for her crowning. Jane's holding back was not just being modest. She was a serious thinker who had got one of the best humanist schools available to anyone in Tudor England. She spoke and wrote Latin, Greek, and Hebrew with great skill. Her letters with Protestant changes across Europe showed complex faith understanding that impressed even university-trained scholars. Her teacher Roger Ascham later wrote that finding Jane reading Plato in Greek, while the rest of the house went hunting, was one of the most memorable sights of his life. But Jane's rule lasted just 9 days. Mary Tudor, learning of her brother's death, gathered backers in East Anglia where Catholic feeling stayed strong. As she walked toward London, something amazing happened. People joined her, was in surprising numbers. Even Protestant nobles left Northumberland, seeing his power grab for what it was. By July 19th, Mary entered London winning, while Jane stayed held in the Tower. At first, Mary showed mercy toward Jane, seeing her as a piece in Northumberland's plan, not a willing taker. Northumberland himself was quickly killed after a failed try to take Mary. Jane and her husband stayed held, but alive their end and sure. Mary's mercy might have held, but in January 1554, Jane's father, the Duke of Suffolk, joined Wyatt's rebellion against the Queen. This fixed Jane's end. On February 12, 1554, Jane watched from her tower window as her husband was led to killing on Tower Hill. Hours later, she herself faced the axe inside the tower's wall. People there said she died with amazing calm, saying Psalm 51, before putting her head on the block. Her last words, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit," showed the deep faith that had led her a short life. Jane's 9-day rule shows one of history's most sad small notes. A brilliant young woman pushed unwillingly onto a throne she never asked for, then killed for a plan she never made. In her we see not just a failed queen, but perhaps the Tudor line's greatest thinker, given up to the religious and political fights that defined her time. Mary Tudor entered London in August 1553, to a city dressed with flags and cheering crowds. After years living under threat during her brother's rule, the 37-year-old daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon now held power as England's first crowned queen ruler. Her win showed more than personal payback. It marked the start of a religious counter-revolution that would earn her the name Bloody Mary. Mary's main goal was clear from the start: bring England back to the Catholic faith. She moved step by step, first bringing back old-style bishops who had been held under Edward VI. Parliament quickly took back the Protestant religious laws of her brother's rule, and by 1550 for England formally made peace with Rome. Pope Julius III celebrated the news that Mary's government made sure all church lands stayed with their new owners, seeing that full return of pre-Reformation property would be politically impossible. The Queen's choice to marry Philip II of Spain in July 1550 proved deeply not liked. England had long seen Spain as a rival and many feared Spanish rule of English matters. Sir Thomas Wyatt led a rebellion in Kent against the match, walking toward London with several thousand men. Though Mary's forces beat the rebels, the uprising showed wide worry about her foreign policy. Philip arrived in England that summer with big celebrations. but was received coldly by the English people. What really set Mary's rule in history memory was her treatment of religious disagreeers. Starting in 1555, her government brought back medieval heresy laws and began trying leading Protestant heads. The first to burn was John Rogers in February 1555, followed by Bishop John Hooper. Over the next 3 years, about 300 men and women would be killed by fire across England. Among them Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, who had led Henry VIII's settlement from Mary's mother. These killings followed a planned pattern. The government staged them in market towns and cities to make their public effect biggest. Authorities printed stories of the trials, hoping to show the rightness of their cause. Yet proof suggests this plan failed badly. Even many set Catholics found the show upsetting. One Spanish watcher said the people were amazed at such great cruelty, and the speakers could not make them believe that those being burned were heretics. The most important watcher to these events was John Fox, who wrote of the Protestant martyrs in his huge accent monument, better known as the Book of Martyrs. His bright stories of suffering changed the victims into heroes of faith, making a Protestant martyr story that shaped English identity for generations. After Mary's death, Fox's book became needed reading in English church areas, fixing her story as a persecutor. Even with her religious seal, Mary's rule faced several crises. England lost Calais, its last land, holding on the continent, to the French in 1558. Bad harvest in 1555 and 1556 led to food shortages and rising prices. Most critically, Mary failed to have a child even with 2 false pregnancies. These ghost pregnancies became a source of both personal pain and political unsureness. In 1550, Mary stopped monthly bleeding and got a swollen belly, classic signs of pregnancy. The court prepared for a birth, but months passed with no child. A similar time happened in 1557. Modern historians suggest these were cases of pseudo-CS, is false pregnancy, or possibly signs of ovarian cysts or womb cancer. The last may be explaining her death in November 1558. When Mary died at age 40, her 5-year return of Catholicism stayed incomplete. Without a child, the crown passed to her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth, really undoing much of Mary's religious story. The Catholic queen, who had lived through tens of years of religious wildness, finally failed to make her faith's future safe in England. On November 17, 1558, Elizabeth Tudor became queen at age 25. As she got news of her sister's death at Hatfield House, she reportedly said part of Psalm 118. "This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes." The kingdom she got was in mess. Religious policies had swung wildly. Between Henry VIII's medium changes, Edward VI's radical Protestantism, and Mary's Catholic return, these turns left the English people split and sure and tired of persecution. Elizabeth's first months on the throne showed her political sense. She made William Cecil, a medium Protestant, her Secretary of State, but kept several Catholic nobles on her Privy Council. This balanced way signaled her plan to find middle ground in a divided nation. Not like those before her, Elizabeth seemed to understand religious peace, not belief. Purity was the path to a safe rule. The 1559 religious settlement formed the backbone of Elizabeth's way to church rule. The process was not smooth. The laws met big fight in the House of Lords, especially from Catholic bishops. The settlement held to key acts. The Act of Supremacy made royal power over the church again, but with a key change: Elizabeth took the title Supreme Governor, not Supreme Head. A small but important difference that saw faith objections to a woman leading the church. The Act of Uniformity brought back a slightly changed version of the 1550 Book of Common Prayer and required its use in all English church areas. The prayer book kept enough old parts to please old-style believers, while adding changed belief to please Protestants. Under this system, going to church services became a city duty. The law needed weekly going to Anglican services with fines for those who refused. Elizabeth's religious policy has often been called the via media, or middle way. It made a specially English form of Protestantism that kept bishops structured church clothes and many old ceremonies while taking changed belief. This way let her move the dangerous religious splits that were tearing apart other European nations. While France fell into tens of years of civil wars between Catholics and Huguenots, and the Holy Roman Empire faced similar fights, England kept fairly religious peace. The real use of the settlement showed Elizabeth's political genius. She insisted on outside matching, while showing little interest in watching private belief. As she famously said, she had no wish to make windows into men's soul. This way let many Catholics go to Anglican services while keeping their private prayers at home. It also let radical Protestants follow official practice while asking for more changes. The settlement pleased few religious purists. Radical Protestants, later called Puritans, thought their changes did not go far enough in taking out popish parts. Catholics, meanwhile, met growing limits, especially after Pope Pius V sent Elizabeth away from the church in 1570. Still, the deal worked because it asked only outside following, not inside belief. Elizabeth's crowning on January 15, 1559, showed her religious policies through carefully set symbols. The ceremony mixed old parts with Protestant new things. During her walk through London, shows displayed the religious direction of the new rule. One specially striking scene showed a child standing for truth rising from a cave, and giving the Queen an English Bible. Elizabeth received it with respect, kissing it and holding it to her chest, a strong picture statement of her Protestant plans. The peace given by the earlier religious settlement let culture, writing and search grow in Elizabeth's later rule. Freed from religious wildness, England took a sure national identity that inspired art wins. She wanted the shaping of a specially English worldview. Through Elizabeth I's rule, one person stood as both a living threat and strong symbol. Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, thereby showed a line chess game with religious war as the background. As Elizabeth's cousin and a Catholic with Tudor blood, Mary stood for the hopes of those who saw Elizabeth as not legal. A heretic queen whose mother's marriage to Henry VIII had never been good in Catholic eyes. Mary arrived in England in 1568 under amazing conditions. Once Queen of both Scotland and France, she had been made to give up the Scottish throne. After a series of bad stories, including her suspected part in her husband Lord Darnley's murder, running from rebel Scottish lords, she crossed the border asking Elizabeth's protection. Instead, she found herself a prisoner, moved between various castles and manors for the next 19 years. Elizabeth faced an impossible problem with Mary. Letting her go might start civil war, but killing a fellow king would set a dangerous example. Mary's presence became a magnet pole for Catholic fight back. In 1569, the Northern Rebellion broke, when Catholic nobles in North England rose up, planning to free Mary and bring back Catholicism. Though crushed by Elizabeth's forces, it showed the Scottish Queen's symbolic power. The stakes rose dramatically in 1570, when Pope Pius V gave the bull Regnans in Excelsis. This statement sent Elizabeth away from the church, called her a faker, and freed her people from any need to obey her. It really allowed her killing. Catholic powers across Europe now had church blessing to overthrow England's Protestant queen and replace her with Mary. A series of plans followed with worrying regularity. The Ridolfi plot of 1571 had plans by an Italian banker to kill Elizabeth, with Spanish army support, and put Mary on the throne. In 1583, the Throckmorton plot aimed to match a French invasion with Mary backers. Each secret plan made limits around Mary tighter and raised fear at Elizabeth's court. The complex spy system that found these plans was largely the making of Sir Francis Walsingham and Elizabeth's spy master. Walsingham had used a network of agents across Europe who took communication, got into Catholic schools and broke secret codes. His ways were very modern. He set up what was a 16th century watching state, with coded messages and double agents protecting Elizabeth. The Babington plot of 1586 proved deciding. Anthony Babington, a young Catholic nobleman, planned, with fellow feelers, to kill Elizabeth and free Mary. Walsingham agents not only got into the group, but controlled their communications. When Mary answered Babington's coded letter agreeing to the killing plan, Walsingham had the proof. He needed the taken letter, in which Mary clearly agreed to Elizabeth's murder, fixed her end. Elizabeth signed Mary's death order in February 1587 after much holding back. The killing at F o' the Ring Castle on February 8th became one of the Tudor time's most dramatic scenes. Mary, dressed in black with a crimson underskirt, the colour of Catholic martyrdom. After her beheading, people there found her small dog had hidden under her skirts. The dog refused to leave her body and had to be forced away, adding a sad detail to an already dramatic scene. Mary's killing removed the most serious line threat to Elizabeth's rule, yet it also changed Mary into a Catholic martyr and gave Spain more reason to send the Armada. The next year Elizabeth said she had never meant the order to be done so fast, and for a short time sent her secretary William Davison to the Tower for doing it without final yes. The tens of years-long fight between these two queens, one who ruled by practical sense and one who lived by feeling, shows how personal rivalries and religious fights twisted into politics. Mary's death marked the final beating of home Catholic fight back, letting Elizabeth fix on outside threats like Spain. In 1588, ties between England and Spain reached their breaking point. King Philip II of Spain, once the husband of England's Catholic Queen Mary, had grown more and more hostile toward Elizabeth I. He saw her as a heretic queen who backed Dutch rebels against Spanish rule and allowed English privateers to attack Spanish treasure ships. Philip chose a bold plan, a huge sea invasion to remove Elizabeth and bring back Catholicism to England. The Spanish Armada had 130 ships carrying about 30,000 men. The plan seemed straight. The Armada would sail up the English Channel, link with the Duke of Parma's army in the Netherlands, and led these troops across the Channel for an invasion of England. Philip called it his Enterprise of England, and many across Catholic Europe thought it would work. England met this threat with a navy of about 200 ships, though many were smaller than their Spanish matches. The English fleet had several plus points, though their ships were faster and could turn better, made for the rough Atlantic, not the Mediterranean. They also carried longer range guns that could shoot heavier balls. The English heads, Lord Howard of Effingham, Sir Francis Drake and John Hawkins, were skilled sailors who knew their home waters. When the Armada entered the English Channel in July 1588, the English took a plan of bothering rather than straight meeting. They followed the Spanish group, attacking stragglers and testing weak points, while stopping the Spanish from setting a place to get Parma's troop. The Spanish ships formed a defensive half-moon shape that proved hard to break. The deciding moment came when the Armada stopped at Calais to wait for word with Parma's forces. The English prepared 8 fire-ships vessels filled with pitch, gunpowder and burnable materials, and sent them with the tide into the tightly packed Spanish fleet. Though none of the Spanish ships caught fire, the threat made them cut their anchor ropes and scatter. Breaking their careful shape the next day, the English met the messy Spanish fleet off Gravelines. The fight lasted 8 hours, with English ships shooting from distance while staying past the range of Spanish guns. Several Spanish ships were sunk and others hurt beyond fix. Unable to return to Calais due to winds and tides, the Armada was forced north into the North Sea. What followed beat the heart of battle, trying to return to Spain by sailing around Scotland and Ireland. The Armada met bad storms. Many ships broke on the rocky coasts of Scotland and Ireland. People who reached shore in Ireland were often unkilled by English forces or unfriendly locals. Of the first 130 ships, only about 60 returned to Spain. The human cost was huge. While England lost no ships and fewer than 100 men, Spain lost about 11,000 sailors and soldiers to battle sickness, hunger, drowning, and killing as people washed ashore. More men died from the trip's hard times than from English cannons. While waiting for the invasion, Elizabeth visited her roots at Tilbury, where she gave her most famous speech. "I know I have the body of a weakened, feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." This moment changed her image from simply a political head to a warrior queen defending her realm. The Armada's beating marked a turn point in Elizabeth's ruling and European power move. While Spain stayed strong, its air of being unbeatable was broken. England's sea story rose, setting the stage for its future as a sea power. Drake's legendary calmness continuing his game of bowls on Plymouth Hoe, when first told of the Armada's approach, became a sign of English calm in the face of danger. A story told again through generations as part of the national story of Elizabethan England. The time after the Spanish Armada's beating marked the flowering of what historians call the Elizabethan Golden Age. With outside threats, smaller England had a cultural renaissance that changed not just the arts, but the very idea of English identity. This time saw the coming of a specially English cultural show that separated itself from land European traditions. At the center of this cultural burst stood the theatre. Before Elizabeth's rule, English drama was mainly religious mystery plays and simple morality tales. By the 1590s, London had several lasting theatres, including the Theatre, the Curtain, the Rose, and most famously the Globe. These would open-air structures drew thousands of watchers from all social classes, from groundless who paid a penny to stand in the yard to rich backers in covered balconies. The plays done at these places changed story telling. William Shakespeare made about 37 plays in this time that searched the human condition with new mind depth. His histories like Richard III and Henry V helped make national story, while tragedies such as Hamlet and Macbeth looked at the complexities of power and want. Christopher Marlowe, before his murder at 29, made morally complex main people in works like Dr. Faustus and Tamburlaine. Other writers, including Ben Jonson, Thomas Kidd, and John Webster, added to this dramatic flowering. Poetry also grew under Elizabeth. Edmund Spenser's epic The Faerie Queene, in story form, celebrated the Tudor lines on it, became fashionable, with Shakespeare and Philip Sidney making sets that grew the form's feeling range. The Queen herself wrote poetry, though mainly in private. Elizabeth on purpose grew this artistic setting, seeing its political worth. She kept a court of special thinkers, artists, and musicians. The arts helped push royal power and national pride. Pictures showed her as the Virgin Queen surrounded by signs of purity and power. Her appearances at court masques and entertainments backed her image as the nation's symbolic mother. The time saw important sea growth. Francis Drake's sailing around the world between 1577 and 1580 brought huge profit and national fame. The trip, with Spanish treasure worth about £160,000, about half the crown's yearly money backers, got a 4,700% return on their first money, while Drake himself gained wealth and knighthood from the Queen. Martin Frobisher and John Davis looked for the Northwest Passage, while Sir Walter Raleigh tried the first English colony in North America at Roanoke. These searches showed growing interest in the natural world. John D. Elizabeth Scott, star reader, collected math tools and pushed practical uses of science. The time saw steps forward in navigation, map making, and star study. Though England was behind land Europe in pure science theory, Elizabeth's self-showing became an art from itself. Her fancy clothes had symbolic pictures and overwhelming decoration. She wore wigs to keep her image of young life force and put white lead makeup to get a pale face linked to nobility. Her famous rainbow portrait shows her dress decorated with eyes and ears, meaning her all-knowing, while she holds a rainbow meaning peace. The idea of England's became clear during this time. The Protestant religion, the English language, more and more set through the Book of Common Prayer and growing reading skill, and a sense of history difference joined to make national knowing. After centuries trying to take back French lands, England began to take its silent identity and see possible. This cultural serenes reached its height in the later years of Elizabeth's rule, setting patterns of art, thought and identity that would influence English and later British culture for hundreds of years. The Elizabethan Golden Age made a base for future national growth through its special joining of art, wind search and growing sense of group identity. The 1590s began a time of slow fall for Elizabeth I. While her rule had reached its top with the beating of the Spanish Armada, her final years brought rising tests that tried even her amazing political skills. Her personal losses began with the death of Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, in 1588. Dudley had been her close friend for 30 years, and his absence made a feeling empty space that was never filled. By 1590, Sir Francis Walsingham and her brilliant spy master also died, followed by William Cecil Lord Burghley in 1598. These deaths took from Elizabeth her most trusted helpers, just when she needed them most. The Queen's money situation fell steadily, lasting fight with Spain stretched royal supplies thin, while army campaigns in Ireland proved both costly and annoying. The 9 Years' War in Ireland 1593 to 1603 needed 18,000 troops at its peak, and emptied the money store of nearly £2 million, a huge sum that meant several years of crown money. Tries to raise money through monopolies on common goods, like salt and starch, made public bad feeling. England also suffered money hard times. The harvest failures of 1594 to 1597 made food prices rise. Fast rising prices cut the buying power of common people, while taxes stayed heavy. The Queen's once-giving Parliament grew unwilling to say yes to new money help, forcing her to sell crown lands to get cash. These money pushes fueled popular unhappy feeling in her final years. Elizabeth's court air changed clearly. The bright, playful way that marked her earlier rule gave way to a more serious setting. New courtiers like Robert Devereux, Earl of S, tried to take back the romantic politics of earlier tens of years, but lacked the subtlety of those before them. Essex, once Elizabeth's favourite, proved more and more unsteady. His without permission return from Ireland in 1599 and later house arrest showed his final act of hopelessness, an attempted rebellion in London in 1601. Elizabeth had no choice but to sign his death order, a choice that reportedly haunted her final years. Elizabeth's self-showing, once a masterwork of political theatre, became more and more hard to keep, though she still appeared in great gowns covered with jewels for public ceremonies. Her physical fall was impossible to hide completely. She reportedly owned about 2,000 dresses at her death, yet ordered all mirrors taken from her private rooms. The Queen, who had once danced for 6 hours without tiring, now needed her courtiers to support her when she walked. The who follows question stayed unanswered publicly. Elizabeth refused to name a person to follow, reportedly saying, "I will have no rascal to succeed me, and who should succeed me but a king?" Yet behind the scenes her government started secret letters with James VI of Scotland, son of Mary, Queen of Scots. By 1601 a not formal understanding existed that James would follow Elizabeth, though the Queen never said yes to this plan openly. In March 1603 Elizabeth's health failed. She developed what modern historians think was bronchial pneumonia. Refusing to go to her bed, some accounts suggest she stood for nearly 3 days. Elizabeth finally let her ladies put cushions on the floor where she lay. She stayed largely quiet during her final days, speaking only sometimes to her closest helpers. When Archbishop Whitfield pushed her to seek comfort in prayer, she reportedly answered that all her thoughts were fixed on God. Elizabeth died in the early hours of March 24, 1603 at Richmond Palace. She was 69 years old and had ruled for 44 years. Within hours Cecil's son Robert sent a messenger to Scotland saying, James following. The change happened without violence or fight back, an amazing win considering the bloody who follows fights that had troubled England for centuries. The peaceful change to the Stuart line showed Elizabeth's final gift to her kingdom, ending the Tudor time not with chaos but with order. When Elizabeth I died at Richmond Palace on March 24, 1603, The Tudor line ended after 118 years. Within hours of her death, Sir Robert Cecil, who had been secretly writing to Scotland, said James VI of Scotland would become James I of England. The news spread fast through London, with statements read at main road crossings and public spaces. England had no born-in-the-land person to follow to the throne for the first time since Henry VII took the crown at Bosworth Field in 1485. James' claim to the English throne came through his great-grandmother Margaret, to Henry VIII's sister. The Scottish king was technically not the closest blood tie. That difference belonged to Lady Arbella Stuart, but Elizabeth's government had quietly decided he was the most fit person to follow. At age 36, James had already ruled Scotland for 36 years, having become king when he was only 13 months old. His experience in rural Protestant faith and male sex made him better than other choices. The change between these lines happened with amazing smoothness. No armed fights broke, no rival claimants raised armies, and the government kept working without stop. The peaceful following stood in sharp difference to earlier moves of power, especially the Wars of the Roses that had brought the Tudors to power a century before. The Elizabethan government's quiet preparation made conditions for peace during a possibly dangerous moment in English history. James left Edinburgh for London on April 5, 1603, travelling south through towns and counties that had never seen their king. His trip became a big walk lasting over a month. The new king stopped at the homes of Protestant nobles, enjoying rich fun and hunting trips. At each stop, local officials gave him gifts and requests. James pleased with his warm welcome, answered by giving knighthood as freely so many that courtiers began calling it his knighting disease. In Newark alone, he knighted 80 men, in one ceremony lowering the worth of an honor that had once needed important army or political service. Though England's change to Stuart rule went peacefully, James met serious tests. He had lived through at least 8 killing tries in Scotland, where side politics often turned violent. His safety worries would prove right when Catholic planners made the gunpowder plot in 1605, trying to blow up Parliament with the king inside. The plots finding backed anti-Catholic feelings and showed the religious tensions James got. The Tudors had changed England's government structure, making central power stronger and cutting noble power. Yet they left unanswered questions about the tie between king and parliament. Elizabeth had carefully handled these tensions through political skill and personal charm. James, though, brought different ideas about kingship from Scotland. He pushed the divine right of kings, writing school papers on the subject. His belief that kings were answerable only to God would finally make rub with Parliament, that his son Charles I would raise to civil war. The end of the Tudor time also marked cultural moves. Especially English Renaissance that grew under Elizabeth gave way to land influences. James backed school work more than Roma liking, academic debate to theatre show. Science search got importance with Francis Bacon, making experimental ways that would change knowledge getting. The king backed a new Bible translation printed in 1611 that would influence English language and thought for hundreds of years. England in 1603 stood at a turn point, no longer the alone island nation fighting for life, but more and more joined with world-searching business. The Tudor story of religious settlement, government centralization and cultural growth gave the base upon which the Stuarts would build a united British state and finally, an empire that reached across the globe. The Tudors reshaped England, religion, power and identity all in just 5 kings. Their story still sounds today. If you like this, subscribe for more epic history told like never before.